welcome everybody. I'm going to turn on my laptop too, so I can see your comments. I
If I
wanted to go
freeze for a
live with
second,
you.
it's because I'm
You
yeah. I
disappeared.
freeze for a second, it's because I'm putting something into Twitter and
Okay,
Blue
good.
Sky.
Yeah,
That's
he's
all.
frozen right now. So for my followers and yours, they're joining us, just piling up now. Thanks so much. You know, it was an exciting weekend with Ukraine. Just a giant strike on Russia using drones in the most original way anyone on earth has ever seen. And it really was a remarkable attack. Those of us who watched it unfold were kind of like shocked. It is rated as the biggest thing that Ukraine's pulled off since the sinking of the Moskva, the cruiser they sank last year or 2 years ago. So it's a really big deal the way they pulled off. But what's really fascinating, now I'm a retired Army officer. I was an aviator. I was a helicopter pilot, which is why there's helicopters behind me in every scene for all those years. And then at the end of part, I was kind of a spokesman. So the part of using drones the way they did really kind of turned me on. And of course, Alex was born in Ukraine. I was an infantry officer and served bravely in combat as well as I did in Iraq. Then, of course, he worked in the National Security Council. Now he's still an expert on Ukraine and hanging out. His house is being rebuilt. So, so if you hear crews hammering, it's not me, it's Alex's house. I am sweaty because it's Missouri and I went walking foolishly before this call. But we want to just gather real quickly. I wanted to talk to Alex for his perspective on this. It's been pretty fast. There's a lot of stuff popping right now of the truth about it and the others. This is what we do know. And what we do know is that somehow, Operation Spider's Web occurred in Russia. They managed to get drones close to a number of airfields all across Russia in multiple regions. They launched them simultaneously. These are FPV drones. Those are first-person view, which means there was actually, of the 117 drones, there was an actual operator for each one. So sitting in a room in in Kyiv or wherever, there's a person at a computer flying that drone, all 117 of them, as they flew out of trucks and attacked these Russian airfields. So Alex, what do you know about all this? I'm not sure. You probably have a better perspective than I do since you've been in Ukraine,
Yeah,
more than I have,
it's
which is zero.
it's a pretty fascinating attack. Gave a bit of a hot take yesterday on Substack on what we did, what we knew, and I think there's still kind of more to study because this is one of those developments that I would say is now focusing the attention of hundreds of Air Force officers the staffs of Strategic Command are thinking through this, what the implications are.
Yeah.
Navy is thinking through what the implications are for their critical assets. DHS should be thinking through what the implications are for their critical assets, the entire nuclear triad as a whole. A lot of this laid bare how vulnerable, especially in our permissive environments. I mean, we live in a
Right.
democracy where people move around freely. Because I think it's important to understand, actually, that you'll notice I start U.S. because it's always about the U.S. and what this means for the U.S. And then we could talk a little bit about Ukraine. But I think what it lays bare is Russia in an authoritarian regime still somewhat permissive.
Right.
Still have the free. It's a capitalist economy. You got the free flow of goods. This is likely used the economic channels out of potentially different portions. Russia is massive, so different portions of the country, whether it's Western, Central Asia, maybe some of this stuff came across from China. Who knows? And it was in a way that it was surreptitious and undetected. Multiple different containers attacking potentially 5, 6, or more bases. The breadth of the country. I mean, just for those of you, don't leave this conversation, but pull out a look at the map and see how big it is and how the different
Yep.
areas that were struck. Everything all the way out to the far east in western Russia. So very, very complex. If you could have something like that happen there, it doesn't really bode well for a lot of democratic countries with open borders, permissive, where drones could be smuggled into, assembled, and then used to attack critical infrastructure, um, hardened nuclear sites in a way that nobody's expected. So when I say folks are scrambling to figure out what this means, they're scrambling to figure out what it means. The ultimate guarantor for U.S. security against our adversaries, the Russians, if they could get away with it, they would get rid of us in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
But the ultimate guarantee is a powerful nuclear triad. So Air Force, ballistic missile bases, the submarines, the bombers, that those are on alert and ready to go and to defend the country.
Yeah.
And it's a stern warning, but it also shows that they're pretty vulnerable. So
Yeah.
that's what's keeping folks awake. DHS also, in terms of whether that's nuclear power plants, just energy generation, could be refineries. There are. This is where things get complex, and I'm going to continue to beat the drum on the U.S. before we get to Ukraine because it's this important.
Yeah.
Um, the Trump administration is looking to spend, they're putting another $150 billion in defense. They're talking about $25 billion into ballistic missile defense, um, Army Missile Defense Command, to build a Golden Dome,
The Golden
which
Dome.
is which is just stupid because
Yeah.
there are a couple of reasons that it's stupid. Would we like love to embrace this idea of a golden dome that protects our cities and makes us invaluable to nuclear war? Yes,
Yeah.
but it's unrealistic. Why is that unrealistic? Because the technology doesn't exist. What we do have is a ballistic missile defense system that protects us against rogue states, countries with small arsenals that could fire off a limited number of weapons, and that we could position ourselves in a dozen different places. As soon as something is fired, we could intercept it. We
Yep.
could intercept a score of weapons. It is not built to. We There isn't a way to build something that could defend against China. More than likely, China has got a still modest arsenal, and Russia's massive arsenal of
Right.
air, land, and sea. So these planes that were destroyed, it's mobile missile launchers, it's fixed missile silos, it's submarines. That is not a. We would be chasing our tail trying to figure out how to defend against something like that. And we actually we threatened Star Wars, we made the Russians spend on air defenses to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars over decades.
Yep.
And it was a competitive strategy to make them spend money on something
Yeah.
that really wasn't going to help the capabilities of their military, and they
Right.
wasted a bunch of resources. And that's what Trump is taking us towards right now with the Golden Dome. What the real threat is are thousands of vulnerable sites around the country.
Right.
Thousands of vulnerable sites around the country that we don't have an easy solution for. But if we invested a fraction of those resources into point defenses, so that's electronic warfare, that's counter UAS technologies, maybe some for the critical sites, lasers. We want
Yeah.
lasers out there
Lasers.
shooting stuff down. Yeah, it's a little Dr. Evil, lighten the mood of it. So I met Mike Myers recently. So
Yeah. Oh,
I
come
watched that
on.
show with my daughter. I
See,
did.
he
I
does.
watched that
This is what
show
Alex,
with
by
my
the way,
daughter.
for those viewers, this is what Alex does in our conversations. He'll just drop shit like that. Like, oh yeah, I was on Curb Your Enthusiasm the other day, and I was
It was on
talking
my.
to
It was on my. Well, it was on my mind. I watched it. I watched Austin Powers with my daughter. So
but
now,
we digress.
yeah. Now, serious face. So back to Ukraine. I mean, what the reports are, and maybe they're a little bit exaggerated. Although I think the Ukrainians have been pretty decent.
Yeah, they're pretty honest. It seems like, and they're bound
They are, but
to.
it's still. I think it's hard to
Yeah.
know for sure. What they're claiming is about a third of Russia's strategic bombers were eliminated. These are, think about our US B-52. The Russians have Bear bombers, these Tu-95s.
Yeah.
They have these supersonic jets that are like our B-1
Yeah.
Spirit. These are still long range, but let's say medium to long range bombers that they're called TU 22s,
Mhm.
and there was a small number of both of these, and the Ukrainians shellacked them across the country. And did they do this because it was a nuclear? They were trying to degrade Russia's nuclear capability, maybe, but probably not. What they
Yeah.
were going after is a perishable, limited capability that the Russians have, unique, and what the Ukrainians didn't have an answer for until the strike. but it was one in which they were trying to eliminate some of the launch platforms for the way that the Russians have been attacking Ukraine. They've
Yep.
been attacking Ukraine cities and inflicting civilian casualties, just raining terror on Ukraine by using these platforms. Again, it's these strategic bombers, it's submarines to come at Ukraine from different vectors, making it very, very difficult to defend.
Yeah.
And those, in conjunction with drones, these Shahed drones, have been inflicting significant damage. So what the
Yeah.
Ukrainians did was they limited the throughput of what the Russians can do. Maybe not immediately, but over the long haul, because these planes require maintenance and there's not enough of them.
Yep. And they don't make
How
Tu.
often Russia
And a
can
good
attack?
thing to note, they don't make Tu-95s anymore. They cannot.
They
They're incapable of making them. Actually, aren't they?
That, well, I mean, they, without a massive recapitalization project,
Yeah.
and
They
the
don't have it.
22s have also
Yep.
have been retrofitted and renovated to keep them operational, but they don't produce them either. They only
Nope.
produce one bomber still,
Yep.
160. So so what they did was they over the long haul, because this war is going to go on for another year, they reduced how often and how successfully Russia could attack Ukrainian cities. Now Russia is going to be more reliant on slow moving drones that the Ukrainians are much better at shooting down than these systems. And
Yep.
the byproduct of this awesome attack has direct implications for U.S. security. You know, I don't know how many times you've heard, you or these folks have heard me mention this, but the war in between Russia and Ukraine affects us. What happens there affects our security.
Yep.
By reducing the number of assets the Russians have, it really degrades their confidence in their nuclear arsenal. One portion of it, their air component, has suffered significant losses, and they still have a powerful nuclear arsenal, but
Yep.
they have less platforms to launch cruise missiles against European cities and cruise missiles and nuclear weapons against the U.S.
Yep.
It's I don't want to wish away that this is still a desperately dangerous situation, but the math behind nuclear deterrence gets very very complex very quickly. You
Yeah.
talk
Yeah.
about counterforce, that you want to have enough weapons to destroy the enemy's nuclear forces, and you
Yep.
want to also have what's called counter value. You want to be able to go after threaten the ability to go after their cities to warn them off,
Yep.
and you need it, and that math is very very precise. You need to have X number of weapons in order to do counterforce. You need to have X number of weapons to do counter value. So when you start to reduce these platforms the way that the Ukrainians did, it's a big math problem for the Ukrainians to solve of
Yeah.
what they do now without this air component, which is
With the
critical. It's
Russians.
what's called a second strike capability. If
Yep.
there was a bolt out of the blue attack, this is the way we think about it.
Yep.
We want to be able to launch our bombers in alert and fly as nuclear bombs are hitting our cities. But
Yep.
then they could go ahead and strike back. And
Yep.
what the bomber, to a certain extent, what these nuclear bombers do are they're the second strike capability. They're part of the deterrence. So it really is going to create a lot of challenges for the Ukrainians, both for the conventional fight, for the strategic fight. And again, these are not like lightly
No, it's a big deal.
considered things. This is a big deal.
And I think for me, I saw a great description of it in one of the conversations. I think Zelensky himself may have said that the mission here, because they've been getting hammered by these missiles, the caliber missiles, the other missiles, but instead of trying to knock down one missile at a time, what this strike did was as somebody said, it knocks down the bow instead of the arrow, right? This was after going actually after the bow instead of the arrow. A bow can shoot a lot of arrows, and you could shoot, but knocking down the bow, it was a brilliant way to do it. And let's talk about the secrecy of the whole thing. I mean, it's incredible. This is supposed to be planned for a year and a half. And then we will definitely circle back. I want to circle back to the United States portion of this, but they've been planning it for a year and a half. We weren't told about it. Stories we weren't told about it. I don't believe the Trump administration knew about it, that's for sure. That they had people in the country that that actual Russian truck drivers delivered these actual drones. They didn't know it was all sealed in boxes. Boxes blew themselves up after. I've seen video that hasn't been confirmed of one of the truck drivers actually getting beat up and killed by a crowd which may or may not be true, but the truck drivers weren't aware they were carrying drones. It's a pretty
Yep.
dramatic. It sends a deep message, I think, strategically as they go into peace talks that you may not. I mean, literally, it was a month ago, right, when Trump told Zelensky you don't have any cards, and he has fucking cards, right? And,
Yeah.
he's got,
Yeah.
and it's a message, isn't it? I mean,
He's got
there's a
pretty good
larger
cards.
strategic message, right?
Yeah. Yep. He's
He
got
had
pretty good
cards.
cards.
He had
I
good
would
cards.
say,
Yeah.
yeah. So I would say that first, this idea of peace talks, I think, is a pipe dream.
Yeah.
The Russians are basically entrenched. The language that they're using is very reminiscent of how they spoke about Ukraine before the war started, and in the opening days when the
Yeah.
Russians were the most powerful, when it looked like they were going to steamroll over, and there was panic. In that period of time, the Russians were talking about a regime change. That they can't have a pro-democratic, pro-Western, democratic administration in Ukraine
Yeah.
and Kiev. They were talking about Ukrainian disarmament, things of that nature. That's a lot of the same rhetoric. I mean, Putin was just talking about the fact that Ukraine still doesn't have a right to exist and stuff. So that's not a useful place
Yeah.
to have a conversation.
Yeah. We're not we're not
And
we're not talking the same things, right?
and yeah, and the Ukrainians don't. They are taking losses. They're losing ground, but it's tiny bits of ground imposing massive costs on Russia. And if anything, I just attended this conference, on Russia, Eastern Europe, Eurasia, and the polling and the data suggests that the Ukrainians have been, as we have witnessed, extremely resilient. And if anything, they've kind of hardened. Under pressure, they harden their resolve to defend themselves. They are not interested. Yes, it's oppressive in the fact that they have to, like, they're losing people and their cities are getting bombed. But that is the effect that you would witness is some sort of like eventual, um, breaking of resolve. That's not the case. That's not what the polling seems to indicate.
Right.
Yes, stress levels have increased significantly. It have absolutely have increased significantly, but it is not breaking their resolve. So that's the first thing. So I think this, and Trump is not helping in the least. It's he's setting up conditions where the Russians feel emboldened, and they're going to continue to kind of. The last conversation, just to be clear, the last conversation between Putin and Trump, Putin managed to swindle and or kind of convince Trump to drop this idea of an immediate ceasefire and then pivot just to negotiations. So how fruitful is that? Just giving away the farm every time. But this is the kind of deals. I mean, he's good about, like, uh, um, he's a good at predator. He goes after weak targets, but
Yeah.
he's not good when faced with resolve. So that's the first thing. What was the second thing? What else do you have something else you
Well,
about?
let's circle
I
back to
just
that. I
wanted to just
mean, yeah,
yeah.
you're just I'm used to talking to you, bro. I gotta keep you. Yeah, you
Yeah.
guys can notice the difference between me. Alex is a big brain, and I am the person like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah, whatever.
This is how we work. What Alex meant to say was that no, it was circling back. You opened it very clearly, right? And now what? Here's let's just open the scope to the whole Ukrainian war. This Ukrainian war has showed vast gaps in technology for modern warfare. There are tanks back in warfare, but they're getting obliterated by little bitty drones. I mean, they've really rewritten how warfare is conducted between major
Yep,
nations, and whether like or not.
yep,
This attack, though, you're right. This is a playbook for anybody. This could be a playbook by for
yep,
Iran. This could be a playbook, and I
yep.
imagine you're right. I bet there's some really sleepless people in the Pentagon right now. Friends of
Y-
ours in the Pentagon right now are sleepless and they got lines
and-
because they're like, oh shit. I mean, an FPV drone could take out a B-52.
Yeah, what's interesting about this is that it shows the asymmetry um, created by technology. So,
Yeah,
we think about, like, powerful, you know, multi-billion-dollar programs, planes, tanks, and all those types of things. And what it shows is that, with some base level technologies evolving, low cost, you could really have an outsized impact. And in a lot of ways, that's what the Ukrainian, the maybe one of the critical lessons of this war are, that it doesn't. And the Houthis did the same thing to us. I mean,
yeah,
they're like a uh, you know like crappy military,
Right.
under drastically under resourced, but they have the capability to detect the ships transiting through the Red Sea, around the Arabian Gulf, and then They then have been, and then they've been armed with some higher capabilities by the Iranians. But it doesn't take a huge amount of technology to disrupt the international commerce. It doesn't take an internet enormous amount of effort to get our carriers to swerve and potentially. I'll see. I don't know what that if that investigation
Dump
will
an
bear out
F-18 off the side,
quite the
right?
same,
Well,
but
we'll never hear, but
exactly.
yep,
But so the point is that the Ukrainians have been like it's been a David and Goliath story, and the Ukrainians have been MacGyvering the heck out of this war, with regards to like their tradecraft and intelligence operations.
yeah,
You look at Ukrainians and Russians; they're standing next to each other. There's no way to tell who's who. The
no,
Ukrainians speak Russian fluently.
yep,
I mean, it's indistinguishable. Now, the Ukrainians can tell the Russians apart. It's easier because they have some different features, but there are tons of folks in eastern and southern Ukraine that speak like Russians, so they could blend in uh,
yep,
better than just about anybody else. They understand the Russian mindset because they're
yep,
in a lot of ways, you could think of them as cousins, although they're completely different nations. They have some commonalities and some common roots, different spirit, of course, as borne out in this war, and they're really really quite crafty.
yeah,
That might account for why a lot of the leadership uh, of the Soviet Union emerged out of Ukraine. But anyway, it's been
yeah.
pretty amazing to watch. This war never gets boring.
Somebody asked how they smuggled them in. What we're hearing is they just sent the containers in sealed with devices. They just sent them in, and they're under trap doors, and they just
Yeah.
shipped them. And that's what
Well,
it looks like it was
remember
done. It wasn't really
the
smuggled per
Kerch
se at
Bridge?
all.
Sure, the Kerch Bridge was the same thing. The Ukrainians basically smuggled munitions and explosives, and then had a unsuspecting Russian,
Yeah.
or I don't even know if we know who it is, but somebody come from the Russian side of the border, driving that truck across and then detonating. So they've
Yep.
done this before. It's a hard thing to defend against.
Yeah, and it is that ingenuity, and it is like that's what's so. I think going back to our political cycle here, we're building a golden dome against ballistic missiles. That is not the threat. It is nothing but a dog. It's just a complete boondoggle, a waste of money. That will go into billionaires' pockets. I'm sure because I bet my left foot SpaceX has something to do with it.
Yeah.
But that's what we're facing. I think in the end, I guess so. Fine. I know we're been going for half. We're getting close to half an hour. Let's talk about what's next. I mean, there's obviously the Vatniks, as we call them, the Russian supporters, like, oh, this was stupid because the Russians are going to reply. I don't know, man. I mean, I always tell people, well, that's war. I mean, they've been doing that. They've been pounding Ukraine, trying to make this thing end. Putin hasn't really showed that he wants to end this thing in any way, shape, or form. Strategically, this sends a big message, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, so I think this creates massive headaches for the Russians at the operation level. It creates significant headaches at the tactical level because they want to be able to conduct these strikes.
Yep.
It has poses a strategic challenge in terms of the
Yeah.
nuclear arsenal and the air wing of the nuclear triad.
I mean, they just took a big
And
leg
then
off the triad, right? I mean, they just cut
sure,
cut a piece of
yeah,
it
a
off.
chunk of it, yeah. So then, where are the Russians? The Russians have a lot of incentives to fight on, and those incentives really come from the political dynamics. They come from
Yeah.
Trump. Trump has, in a lot of ways,
Mm,
is a very, very enticing proposition.
mm,
Trump is breaking our relationships with our traditional powers, sowing discord. They
yep.
want to see how far that goes, and the pressure of this war adds to that challenge. They could saber out World War III, and
Yeah.
taco happens. We get the taco effect. So
Totally taken up.
unfortunately,
That's true. Mm,
yeah. So I think that's part of it. It's not something to take lightly, but that's where things tend to land. And
yeah.
then there's there Putin may be confident in himself to be able to distract uh Trump or entice Trump with all these transactional wins and convince him that um, that maybe it's time to break the support to Ukraine. So cut off the intelligence sharing,
Yeah.
cut off all that security assistance, and maybe he convinced him that that's the way to peace. Some
Mm.
nonsensical idea that is exactly the opposite of what would be effective. Ratcheting up pressure. Think about it right now. This would be an awesome moment to ratchet up pressure.
Yeah.
Levy sanctions,
Yep.
support Ukraine. Russia is, getting all sorts of strategic effects. The economy is increasingly weak. Instead, he might try to bluff him. So the incentives are for Putin to keep fighting, even as it gets harder and harder, to test this proposition of what he could get through diplomacy and his relationship with Trump that he can't achieve on the battlefield. So I think that means another year. We're looking at
Mm.
like a campaign cycle. We got this campaign cycle. Think about like the fact that how
Mm.
how this war is unfolded. Some
Mm.
spring summer offensives was where they try to make their big gains. So
Yeah.
we'll have one of those that they already were going to do no matter what. Even if they had a Harris administration, they were going to test it, see if what could happen.
Yeah.
And based on the outcomes there, they would probably have been maybe open to negotiating. Now they're going to probably think about another campaign cycle. So that takes us through next year,
Midterms.
unfortunately,
Yeah.
with like the impacts on the civilian population and the tragedies that are going to fold there. But I
Mm.
think we're that's what we're in for.
It makes sense. I mean, they're going to try to hold their cards as long as they can with Trump support. If Congress flips and then the Democratic Congress comes in, it changes the dynamic quite a bit. It makes a lot of sense. Well, I really appreciate it. We've had you for a while. We got, oh my God, a staggering number of folks come. But this is the most important. I can't let you go, Alex, without talking about this, your new book,
What is that?
Follicularism. I got this. Look at this book, yo. Tell everybody about the book. Tell my followers about the
Yeah.
book and why they should buy it right now.
So really, the genesis of the book was watching these things unfold firsthand.
Yeah.
And finding it turns out I had time. My military career ended abruptly, so I had a chance to work on my
What
on a
happened? Something happened?
yeah. I was working on my doctorate, and I wanted to kind of see if my suspicions matched the data. And what I
Yeah.
looked at was the last 35 years of the relationships across Republican and Democratic administrations. And what I discovered was that basically both sides made quite a few mistakes, succumbing to misplaced hopes that we could do more with Russia. This is Trump. This is Putin
Yeah.
talking to Bush,
Yeah.
and Bush seeing his Putin's soul, and then buying this idea that they were going to help the Russians are going to help us with regards to rooting out terrorism, or that we would work together on climate change, any number of different things. And the same thing happened under Democratic administrations, free
Yeah.
sets that thought we could kind of get back to like we could come to a common understanding, or that we could put that conflict aside,
The reset button.
or the reset button, or the fears that if we didn't hold the Russians' feet to the fire, that that was going to drive a second Cold War. And we got there because instead, what we did is bred a sense of impunity that the Russians could get away with more and more,
Yeah.
graduating from just mischief making to hybrid warfare, interfering in country elections, and
Yeah.
cyber attacks to military aggression. So that's half of it. The other half of it is really, so what do we do about it? Because that's where we get trained to. You can't kind of pose a problem without a solution.
Yeah.
And I talk about the fact that we have a current of in the U.S. of adhering to a certain set of values: life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. That's in the domestic context. In the domestic and international context, we think about supporting fellow democracies because they're the source of our strength and the source of our prosperity.
Yep.
And what I talk about is the fact that our values should be front and center, because they allow us to navigate past these bright, shiny
Mm.
objects of
Mm.
hopes and fears. And it's not pie in the sky idealistic. It's not ideological. It's really practical because of the rejection of this cult of realism that says everything is transaction immediately in front of us. And that's
Yeah.
where the way how you get to Trump. He's completely transactional. So that's what
Yeah.
the book is about. It's it was I happy to be out there and talking about it and try to um, help folks understand, that this is not just about Russia and Ukraine. It's about how we conduct ourselves around the world, and we need a path to recapture U.S. moral leadership, especially after we recovering from this disastrous Trump era. But yeah, still out
I
there
love it.
talking to folks.
I highly
Yep.
recommend it. I got a copy early because I know people, the guy.
Mhm.
So get yourself over to your get yourself over. Oh my God,
Yeah.
Rachel Vindman's here. It's incredible.
Wait,
You heard of her?
that's
Yeah, Rachel
there's
Vindman. I've never.
yeah.
Wow.
Wait, that's a big time.
What an honor. We
We
have
we
Rachel Vindman
landed.
joining us.
We've managed to pull Rachel Vindman into
Oh,
this.
I'm telling you, this is a
We've now
big day
landed
of
on the
show
map.
right here.
Yes, yeah,
It's
yeah.
incredible.
Uh, that
Without letting you go, I gotta
yeah.
say it because it's your birthday too, but I won't let it because we're gonna end this soon. But Unite for Veterans, Unite for America. You see me wearing it because I can't do graphics on the phone. That, of course, is this Friday at 2 o'clock on the National Mall. I'm one of the organizers. June 6th is also Alex's birthday, so he won't be with us, but it's fine. We forgive him anyway. But there
Yeah.
will be a whole lot of us on the National Mall: veterans, allies, federal
Awesome.
workers, supporters. We're expecting maybe 10,000 people, which is really hard to wrap my head around. I will be one of the last speakers,
Awesome.
which is kind of crazy. And Dropkick Murphys will be there performing live, electric set. They've done some protests all this cycle of as people are ramping up to protest this movement. But by the way, did you know that Dropkick Murphys were just in Ukraine last week? I don't know if you know this, but Ken
That's awesome.
Casey and the band, they delivered aid supplies, truckloads of
Was
aid
that part of?
supplies.
Okay, yeah, we might have some common
Our
friends
friend,
that
our
are
friend
happy about
Ken
that.
Harbaugh. Ken Harbaugh is over there at Valor Media. Yeah, they
Mm.
went over
Yeah,
together. So
good stuff.
Ken's gonna be our MC. So it's all
Yeah,
intertwined.
it's good stuff. But I
Yeah,
can't leave this conversation without saying, I'm still marveling at the fact that we managed to pull that beautiful Rachel Vindman into the
I
Substack,
know.
and
It's
shout
incredible.
out to her. Shout out to her.
She's
All right.
managing both of us now. She's texting me like,
Yeah.
"Shut up." So thanks.
All right.
Thanks for joining us. Thanks for Alex. Your audience is here. My audience is the most important thing, of course, because we're on Substack. Folks, subscribe. fpwellman.substack.com. Alex Vindman, of course, is on here as well. His Substack is incredible. We both try to do good things and talk about our democracy and the things that are happening, so you understand that better. It's all free unless you want to upgrade to paid, which we both appreciate, I'm sure. In the meantime, I will be putting out some more stuff. Thank you so much for joining us at such short notice, Alex. Thanks for being my Alex. Come on live with me, okay? By the way,
Always happy to do
secret
it.
sauce is
Yeah.
I call his wife first. I call Rachel first.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the
She gets
secret
things
move,
done.
but she gets things
Yeah.
done. So thanks for everybody joining us. We saw some Stephen Beschloss was here for a while. Gary Kasparov was here for a while. Of course, Rachel Vin was here. So many of you friendly faces from my own list. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you again later. Thanks, Alex. Let's get back in the fight.
All right. Awesome.
See
Thank you.
you later. Bye now.
Okay.